that this presentation will be recorded. Davis Jenkins is a senior research associate at the Community College Research Center at Columbia University's Teachers College. He works with colleges and states to find ways to improve educational and employment outcomes for students, particularly those from disadvantaged backgrounds. Davis's research and thinking have informed the development and spread of innovative approaches to improving student outcomes, including career pathways, adult technical bridge programs, such as Washington State's iBest, and Guided Pathways to Success, GPS. Together with Thomas Bailey and Shauna Jaggers, he is the author of a forthcoming book, Redesigning America's Colleges, A Clearer Path to Student Success, which is based on CCRC's research on redesigning community colleges to improve student success, and which will be published by Harvard University Press in early 2015. He is joined by Dr. Rob Johnstone, who works to help 2- and 4-year colleges create structures and processes that increase student completion, learning, and labor market outcomes. His unique and engaging approach to inquiry and improvement fuses the world of foundations, initiatives, and system-level policy changes with ground-level work of college practitioners and college senior leaders. He has worked on the ground with over 150 colleges, both directly and on initiatives such as Gates, Completion by Design, Aspen Prize for Community College Excellence, Lumina's Beyond Financial Aid, Lumina's Guided Pathways for Success, Kresge and Gates Pathways projects in Arkansas, Michigan, and Seattle area colleges, Texas Completes, Carnegie Statway, Quantway, and the Education Trust Access to Success. He served as a director, dean, and provost in the California Community College system for over a decade and worked as a strategic consultant in industry prior to shifting to higher education. He brings a unique dual perspective with over 20 years of consulting experience in industry and higher education, and brings an energy and passion for authentic change to improve outcomes. Without further ado, Dr. Jenkins, please take it away.
Okay, thank you. Please call me Davis. I don't know if you can see me. I wish I couldn't see me. I hope this presentation goes better than I look. Anyhow, can you see my webcam or not? You see it?
It's dark at the moment, Davis, at least on mine.
Okay. Anyhow, so these ideas, at CCRC, we've been involved in research on improving student success in conjunction with many colleges throughout the country, many state systems, a number of large initiatives like the ones that were mentioned in Rob's bio. And basically what comes out of the research that we and others have done on these initiatives is that we see some limited success or improvement in student success. But that tends to apply to a relatively small number of students who've been affected by the given intervention, and it deteriorates over time. What we haven't seen, with some exceptions that we'll talk about, is a moving of the needle in terms of student completion and success. So this has caused us to step back and to take a look not just at individual interventions, but of how community colleges and, by the way, broad access 4-year institutions are organized. And what we see is that these organizations, community colleges, broad access 4-year, very well organized to do what we as a society asked you guys to do in the 60s, 70s, 80s, which was broadly improve access to higher ed. This has really been the marvel of the world, and it's being replicated in many other countries, India and the like. What colleges are not necessarily, on the whole at least, well designed to do is to help students choose a program of study, a coherent program of study that leads them to on a clear path to further education and careers. There are too many choices, too little guidance, and when you look at the paths themselves, especially the paths to transfer or the paths into career programs, the paths aren't clear. And when we talk to students and when other people talk to students like Kay McClenny and company at CESI or WestEd or Public Agenda, students say they're confused. So this has caused us to step back and to rethink the pathway, to take a look at the student pathway through college, starting with the starting throughout the entire student's experience, from the time they say, "Hey, I think I might want to go to college," to the entry point where they're just getting into college, and till as they progress through college, and then not just when they complete a program of study, but really what happens to them afterwards. So most of the research, most of the reforms to date have been focused on that second phase, which is entry. Actually, the connection phase, especially with community colleges, there's very little research. There's actually some interesting studies that just came out recently, finding that a very substantial proportion of students who graduate high school in June, intending to go to the community college, don't show up in August for classes. One study looking at one sample estimated that was 40% of high school graduates who intended to go, who graduated in June, intended to go in the fall to college, didn't show up. Now, of course, a lot of these students will show up later on, but we know that entry is delayed. Actually, that study showed that just by sending text messages to students and other nudges, if you will, that it dramatically increased the yield rate, if you will. But also, folks haven't looked as much on the other end. And this is a big focus of CCRC's research, and mine in particular, looking at students not just entering college and progressing, but entering a program of study. Because it's like the lottery. In order to play, in order to win, you got to play. So in order to graduate, get a credential from college, you got to enter a program. And the program requirements, program pathways, program outcomes are very different. Another reason we focus on programs is that a lot of the initiatives like Achieving the Dream have used very global measures of college success, like retention rates and completion rates and the like, which are of course of interest in a global sense to administrators, not so much of interest, on a day-to-day basis to faculty. But when you show students in their programs how they're doing in their programs, it changes the conversation. And again, we're not just looking at completion, we're looking at what happens both in terms of further education at the next level, and careers. So all the research, which has involved quantitative research, a lot of talking to students, analyzing the process by which students are going through and the various processes that colleges have, can be summarized in 4 words. Students are lost. Most students come to community colleges without clear ideas or clear goals for college and careers. And when you think about it, I mean, they not only lack clear goals, they don't have a clear idea of what the options are. And yet we provide very little in the way of assistance to them. Most students, about 80% of community college students, come in thinking they want a bachelor's degree. Now, they have no idea what that is. They don't really know what a major is. They don't know what a credit hour is. They don't know the difference between core credit or major credit and elective credit. They don't really understand what an associate degree is. They don't understand anything really about the transfer process. They really know very little except that they want a bachelor's degree. And so of course they want a career. They want to make money, which is why they want the bachelor's degree. Well, what do we say to them generally? Unless they have a pretty clear idea of a career area they want to go into. Nursing is an exception. A lot of people want to go into nursing. And there's a fairly clear path to those, but we find that many younger students in particular don't know about the career programs within community colleges outside of business and nursing. And so generally what we say if a student says, well, I want to transfer, we say, well, you should get your gen eds out of the way, and here they are. This is taken from an actual college catalog, not a New Jersey one, but it's at this point, Rob and I, when we're live, we often go to colleges' websites, but since we don't want to shame anyone in Jersey, it's not good to piss off someone in Jersey. We just show here that generally, this is a very confusing list of courses and programs, and we say, this was another thing, recommended list of courses for transfer. Again, very little guidance to students on what these courses are, what sequence to take them in, and how they fit in the broader scheme, what the path is, and how they relate to careers. And for most students coming in, we say, oh yeah, and by the way, not only should you take Gen Ed, but even before you can get to Gen Ed, you've got to go through remediation. And it's typically 2 or 3 levels below college, and essentially starting middle school pre-algebra. And that's very discouraging to students. So what we find is that between 40 and 50% of community college students, after 2 or 3 terms, are gone. They're gone completely. That is, they're not coming to another institution. Of those who continue on outside of the career fields, we find that their patterns of enrollment are very chaotic. Full-time to part-time, they drop out. But also when we look at what courses they're taking, they often don't add up to a career. Rob always urges, and maybe folks, to take a look at, just pick some random transcripts of students and see if you can figure out what they're doing.
Yeah. What I love to do is, when we're talking about this, it takes, and this works for 2- and 4-year colleges, by the way, take someone in their 3rd or 4th semester who's been at the college for a couple years and who isn't in one of your structured programs of the science. So take a Gen Ed or pre-transfer student and just take a look at one of their transcripts. And it is a very sobering experience when you do this, by the way. And when you're talking with faculty who are on the ground, it really is eye-opening to what students end up having on there because of the lack of structure and the lack of a guide through this maze that we talk about. And I've been involved in situations where we've done it both 2- and 4-year schools, and only in rare cases do you actually find coherence. One of my other favorite questions is to ask yourself, if you randomly pulled that student out of the classroom who's in their 3rd or 4th semester and ask them, so how far are you towards your degree and exactly what classes do you have left to go? Ask yourself whether they would know the answer to that question. And this isn't a gotcha that you're doing something specifically wrong at your college. This is how it's been for years. And so it's a very eye-opening experience that talks about, Davis has been focusing on this notion of being lost in a maze, and we've got such great data, qualitative data on this from talking to real students about this all across the country.
Yeah. So as a result, students meander. You've got 3 groups of students who are meandering big time. One is your pre-health students, your pre-nursing students, and also your selective students who are trying to get into your other selective healthcare programs. We actually find that many of these students are racking up college-level credits, not just developmental credits, 30, 40, 50, 60 credits or more, but they're not getting the grades they need to get into nursing or the other selective programs, and yet no one's sort of redirecting them. The second second big large group is the whole Gen Ed, Dev Ed area. Those students they're seeking to transfer, but they aren't clear on what the path to transfer is. We find many of those students actually, because they don't see a clear path, transfer before they complete even their Gen Ed requirements, let alone their associate degree, even though research we've done suggests that earning an associate degree improves their chances of getting a bachelor's degree. And more importantly, and my colleague Clive Belfield did a study quantifying this, because many students who transfer don't get a bachelor's degree or don't get it right away, if they transfer without the associate degree and don't get the bachelor's, they got nothing. And that shows up in their labor market returns. They're essentially where high school graduates are, even though they've taken all this education. So, and beyond the completion issue, this really is an issue for learning, because if we're allowing students to cobble together their education program from a list of distribution list of courses, we're not like this. They're essentially not building skills across the curriculum in a coherent way. And the research on learning from K-12, but also from higher education, I'd encourage you to look at the Eberly Center, which is at Carnegie Mellon University, 7 elements of effective teaching and learning in higher education. A lot of it has to do with making connections and creating a coherent program of study. So this is an issue when we talk with faculty that we really emphasize, that just putting together, checking off boxes on a distribution list is not a liberal arts education. It's not a strong general education. So again, students are really frustrated, and there's a lot of good research from Public Agenda. CESI's done a lot of work. There was a study in Public Agenda in Indiana that did 50 focus groups of students who had transferred to Indiana University regional campuses, somewhat like New Jersey, fairly decentralized state, from the Ivy Tech or the Vincennes two-year institutions. And most of the students had taken courses at the community college that did not transfer toward their major. And many students were frustrated. They were saying things like, I should have known these institutions were in competition with one another. I should have known that the advisors, while very well-meaning, were not being communicated with or not communicating with the faculty in the community college, let alone at the university. I should have known that the only person I could get accurate information from about what would actually transfer, and we find this as well, is not just the advisors at the university, but the chair of the department of the program to which I want to major or transfer. So, not every student coming out of the Newark Public Schools knows to go to, over there to the university and, set up an appointment with the chair of business and figure out what it is they want to do, or what it is they got to do. So this again has led us to step back and take a look not just at particular interventions, but of the big picture and of the path that students take. And the status quo, we call it self-directed or sometimes the cafeteria model, because it really relies on student finding their own way. There are services available, but they got to help. They got to get them themselves, starting with career and college planning. Yes, there are career centers, and there's help from advisors, but Kay McClenny in the NESI study found that 40% of new students didn't even know their college offered a career center. And most students, when they go to the career center, tend to go near the end of their programs. And of course, by that point, as I've mentioned, a lot of students drop out. Similarly with advising, the students who go to advisors tend to be those who really need it the least. The paths, as we've talked about, are unclear and too many choices. And this is true, not obviously for transfer, but it's true, again, for the paths into the career programs. And especially many young people or people don't have a clear idea of the labor market, haven't been out there, don't know about the technician kinds of certificate and applied associate degree programs that many community colleges offer outside of nursing. So as a result, as I mentioned, this has an issue not just for student retention, but for skill building across the curriculum. So, it's hard to know, hard to say, can we really say that students are prepared to succeed as juniors in a major, or to, be the kind of critical thinkers that we're telling employers that we're turning out and want to turn out. Assessment is used to sort students at the front end, and remediation is very focused on really two courses, college algebra and English composition. Even though I did a paper with Matt Seidenberg, my colleague, we found that other courses, other gatekeeper courses like Psych 101, Bio 101, Econ 101, Anatomy and Physiology 101 are every bit as predictive as college algebra, college math, and English of success. And obviously, to get into a program of study, if you're in business, passing Econ, Accounting, Management 101, those are hard courses. Those are as important as English and math, and yet all the remediation is focused on those two things.
And I'll pop in, Davis, and just say, those
Sure.
of you who were last year when I was in New Jersey, you heard me say this, and I talk a lot about somewhere along the line, we let math and English, narrowly defined, become the only two arbiters of college readiness. There's significant research. Davis is talking about the course level research about how predictive other courses are programs. But, I and others have research of how predictive a host of factors are that have nothing to do with math and English. Math and English are incredibly important, but I think one of the conclusions of the kind of trends in the dev ed research and thinking in the last decade has been that we've been thinking about it a little too narrowly, and that math and English are the only ways that we can measure whether students are prepared for college. And I think what the research tells us is there are proxies, they're somewhat predictive, but the question of whether it's really math or English that are driving the relationships we see or other factors is a pretty important one. And some of the data leads us to think that some of the non-cognitive factors are equally as important, if not more important, things like confidence, social capital, and hope, and productive persistence. And so another piece of this is also that it's not just about how we've done Dev Ed Math and English, but the fact that we've only used Dev Ed Math and English, which has largely had them served as filters rather than any process of trying to develop or bring students more who are probably already more likely to be ready to do the work at the transfer level.
Right. And Rob mentioned earlier that students' progress isn't monitored, and as a result, and there's limited feedback, and as a result, students generally don't know how far they've come and how far they have to go, which is really an issue for motivation. So again, this is cause folks, and actually these models, we're going to show some examples. We're really pioneered in universities, starting with Florida State and Georgia State and others. But the idea here is to really start with the end in mind, to have required plans that students are required to actually follow, and to help students, provide students not just with information about careers, but help them explore careers as part of their curriculum. And I'm going to show you, we're going to show you an example of that in a minute, where it can actually be done as part of the curriculum. Students' plans are based on default full program maps created by faculty and advisors to clearly lead to further education and ultimately to career outcomes. The key here is because students are ultimately interested in careers and degrees as a means of those, we got to keep the end in mind, and the maps clearly have to lead to these. They're default in that, you know, this is the best advice we're giving you as a, you know, if I'm someone who's a student who's interested in accounting, this is essentially the route that I would recommend. Now, students can change it, so, but they have to opt out of it. They have to go see someone to change it. They can't put it together themselves. And this is the research on behavioral economics suggests that this is a good way to help students navigate, or help people navigate very complex decision contexts like, you know, trying to figure out a program of study. Student learning outcomes are aligned with end goals and assessed not just within courses, but across a program, because of the importance of creating a coherent program of study that I indicated the research shows is so important. Assessment is used not to sort students, but to help diagnose their areas where support is needed. We basically assume, and this approach essentially assumes, that no new student, I'm going to repeat that, no new entering student who doesn't already have a college degree or who isn't already been successful in post-secondary education is ready for college. And readiness is not just about academics. It's certainly not just about algebra and math. It has to do with these other non-cognitive things. And when you look at the kinds of intake systems that, you know, even elite institutions use, they focus on these as well as the academic areas and try to build this into the curriculum, not just into the initial orientation. I'm going to show you some examples. Instead of having a prerequisite remediation, this academic support is, to the extent possible, contextualized and integrated in the program gateway courses. And that means, like, you know, for nursing, it's Bio 101, the Anatomy and Physiology 101, as in addition to math and in English, and ideally the math that's offered is appropriate to the program of study. And there's both through technology, through e-advising system, but also through reorganized advising. Students' progress is tracked. They're provided with feedback, and they can see how far along they are, and the college knows how far along they are toward not just, you know, getting 60 credits or whatever, but actually completing a program of study. So we're going to just go through some examples here. So the core of this idea, it's not sufficient, but the core of this idea is the academic map. And I'm going to show you some examples, but here's a sort of a template. The map, very importantly, provides a brief introduction of the program, and then you'll see it provides a sample schedule. Actually, this only shows 2 terms, but it would show the entire schedule for all 4 terms if it's an associate degree, for example, including, you know, the suggested sequence of programs. There can be electives, but the electives have to be a relatively narrow set that makes sense for an educational purpose. The second column you see is milestones, and this includes critical courses that students have to pass in order to that you know, critical courses like with a particular grade point average, like anatomy and physiology, or, you know, Bio 101 to get into nursing, and also positive milestones like, you know, if this is your 3rd term and you're in an electronic tech program, you need to get your resume in order and you need to get an internship. Or if you're transferring, you need to put in your applications to the university to transfer. Very importantly is a list of sample job titles and potential employers. This was created by a 4-year institution, Florida State University, but for community colleges, in addition to the career outcomes, we need to very clearly show the bachelor's, the potential bachelor's transfer programs, and ideally show what a bachelor's program looks like in the junior and senior year, what kind of courses you're taking, and the like. So I'm going to run through quickly some examples. First is from a 4-year institution, Arizona State University, which is a very huge institution, but to show how this can be done on a very large scale. Arizona State has 300 majors, but they're all indicated in these pictures here, most of which are really about careers. So I'm going to just quickly run, when you type in, you know, when you Google undergraduate degrees at Arizona State, this is the screen that pops up. And you'll see they have cool majors there. And so here are the list of cool majors, starting with accountancy. I didn't realize that was a cool major. I don't see psych on here. Rob, sorry about that. But I guess these are essentially tech majors.
There's too many of us.
There are too many of you. Okay, these are majors that are cool because you make enough money in order to be able to afford to be cool. But as you can see on the right, that, you know, there's lots of information, but you can compare programs side by side. So let's just type on accountancy. And again, so we've gone from those pictures to you know, these cool majors, and then the next click is to the description of the accountancy program. And you'll see this essential template that I was talking about in terms of the academic map showing up. So it talks about the program. There's YouTubes about the program and about exciting careers in accountancy. You'll see sort of near the bottom, students, they've done click analyses. Most readily look at second language requirement. No, thank God. They also look at program math intensity, moderate, because they're concerned about, well, what's it take to get into this? And then when we scroll down, they talk about special requirements that are needed for this degree. Scrolling down even further, they talk about transfer agreements. I'll talk about those in a minute. And then at the bottom of the page, but it's still the same page, very importantly, they talk about the careers that you can get with a bachelor's in accounting, and the outlook and the like, the salary and the growth outlook for the Phoenix area. And you can drill down and get information on what kinds of things, what kinds of job titles do financial examiners, you know, have, and what do they do, review balance sheets and the like. And you could, you know, really elaborate on this with YouTubes, et cetera, et cetera. There's all kinds of things you can do. And of course, information on wages and the like. So the point is, in the program description, very clearly tying it to careers. Then when I type on the major map, it runs me through a term by term, and this would be 8 terms, a term by term program map where I see the list of courses in sequence, with most of the courses fairly well specified. And you'll see these diamonds there. Those are the critical courses. That is, courses that both statistically and the faculty within the accountancy have determined you got to pass this course with at least a C in order to succeed in accountancy. And if you don't pass it, they're going to try to help you pass that course. But if you don't pass that course, they're going to require you to take another major. So this gets in the community college space. This gets at what we do with pre-nurses. Are we going to, as many colleges do, maybe it's different in Jersey, I don't know, but in many colleges we let pre-nurses and other pre-selective health program students bang their head against the wall, try to get the prereqs at the appropriate grades, and many of them they pass courses. They may get a B- in Bio 101, which is a hard course, and that's a decent grade, but it's not enough to get you into nursing. So the question is, are we going to let them continue on when we know they're not going to get into nursing, or are we going to help them find alternative paths either through other clinical areas, or there's lots of non-clinical program or opportunities for employment in business in healthcare. You might have seen in that first screen exploratory. If you're coming into Arizona State, you don't know which of the 300 majors you want to enter into, you're required to take one of 7 or 8 listed here exploratory majors: business, education, engineering, computing, math, technology, health, humanities, fine arts and design, STEM, social and behavioral sciences. These are 2 to 3 term prescribed courses of study that give you a taste of, say, business. You take a business course, but you're also taking other things. You're also required to take a required workshop that was developed by developmental psychologists to explore students' personal, academic, and career interests and aptitudes, all with the goal of deciding, am I going to continue on in business toward a specific major like accountancy or marketing or whatever, or am I going to move to another area? And what I like about this is that we can only dump so much information on students. This takes an initial hunch of students that I'm interested in business and actually begins to give them a taste of what business education is like. However, without locking them in. It's very clear in these exploratory majors when I will get locked in business. That is, when I start taking courses that won't transfer to other areas. If Arizona State says that if you continue on beyond 30 credits without choosing a major, they'll put you on a Bachelor's of General Studies program, but they'll say, of course, you're not going to get into any graduate school with this, and employers are going to look at a Bachelor's of General Studies and say, what is this? So you see, it's very prescribed in some ways, but what this is doing is not limiting students' choice, it's helping to structure students' choice. So in other words, these exploratory majors enable students to explore 300 majors, but to do it in a way where they're not just getting information, but they're actually exploring a field and that they're interested in, and doing it in a very structured way, with the opportunity to move to another area and to customize their map. But in order to customize, it's an opt-out. They need to go see someone to do it. They need to see a faculty member. They need to see an advisor. They can't just do it on their own. And so, this allows just a slew of analytics that the college and departments can do. They see who's in what program. But you see here the very important analytic, which is how many students are on track. That is, what percentage of students are on path according to their majors. And as you see, in 2007, before they implemented this, it wasn't so hot. And that's helped to improve the retention of students over time. I just want to mention briefly, they've taken these maps, these program maps, and extended them down into the community college. This is an example of a home page or a web page for a student at one of the Maricopa colleges. And this is basically shows the student where they stand, how far along they are toward transferring with junior standing. And in accountancy, it looks like at the university, and the university can see students coming through the pipeline, and both the university and departments and the community college advisors and departments can look at the students, can look at this information, at least in the aggregate, and see how students are progressing along. And you'll see this provides a map for students on what they've taken to satisfy various Arizona and associate degree and university requirements. If they succeed and if they complete these maps, they're guaranteed junior standing in a major, and for Arizona residents, they get a pretty substantial tuition discount. So actually what's even more interesting in a way is that they're beginning to move these maps down into the K-12 schools, into the high schools. And so this is something actually that we're seeing more and more community colleges. We were just at Valencia Community College, and they're considering how to build these maps back down into the K-12 schools so that students, they're not getting into a major, but they're beginning to explore a broad area early on. And the research has basically suggested that, these high school academies and the like, that it's really helpful for students to explore. So I real quickly want to just run through some community college examples. You'll see very similar patterns in terms of these maps. So when you do when you do programs, academic programs at Queensborough Community College, you see this page. And new students at Queensborough are required to choose one. This is part of the CUNY system, as you know. One of 5 academies. And the academies are structured by faculty members as well as by advisors who are embedded in these academies. And the faculty and the advisors work together to clarify the paths, to make sure that there's information on each of these. So if I click down in business, the Business Academy, you'll see the programs at the bottom of the screen. And if I clicked on those, you would see, information on the sequence of courses that you need to take, the courses that are required. There's also a lot of good information that's pretty clearly attached to this Business Academy website on transfer opportunities as well as career opportunities. Often when we look at community college websites, you go to the Career Coach website and it presents you with BLS data, Bureau of Labor Statistics data on all programs. Here in this example, it's very clearly tied to the program of study. And there's information, as you can see, on the dual joint enrollment program with John Jay College of Law, in forensic accounting, a very prestigious school for an Associate of Science that will get you junior standing, leading to a BS in Economics and Forensic Financial Analysis. So there's all this information about transfer as well. When they started this, they started with first-time, full-time students in 2009. Their federal 3-year first-time, full-time completion rate was 12%. Most recently, they're up to 17%. Now, they've done a lot of other stuff in addition to these academies, but when we talk to folks there, and they have done a lot of surveying of faculty and students, the faculty like it because it helps them work with other like-minded faculty in the program. The students, and especially those in developmental, like it because, as one student says, it gives me, I could see the light at the end of the tunnel. Pre-nursing students say that they like it because they know who the other pre-nursing students are. In many colleges, pre-nursing students are just sort of mixed in with the other gen ed students. They don't know who to study with for these hard prerequisite courses. So it builds, even without strict cohorts, it builds cohorts effects, which we and others have found is really useful for student success. Another quick example from CUNY is Gutman College. The new community college at CUNY. It was designed, it had the good fortune that none of the rest of us have, to redesign or design an institution from the bottom up. 5 majors, all of which are based on growth job areas in the occupations in New York City, and very clearly aligned with junior and senior major level programs at the CUNY senior institutions. In the first year, students who are required to attend first time take a common seminar or a common curriculum that is designed like an exploratory major, if you will, to help them figure out which of those 5 majors they want to get into. And here's the first and second, here's the, I guess the first year curriculum. And what you'll notice here is that there is no developmental, even though these are regular community college students, except that they're required to attend full time. Essentially, the academic support is built into the program, into these fundamental courses you'll see under the first year. And CUNY Gutman had for a 3-year goal of 35% graduation rate. Their first graduation last June. After the second year, they were able to graduate 28% of their students, which compares to less than 10% for other 2-year graduation rates for other CUNY and large urban institutions. And so they definitely feel that they're going to be able to beat that 3-year 35% mark. Again, a lot else that they're doing here, but this basic structure of clearly defined majors or program areas leading to careers and further education, and help with students to explore their curriculum, their career and college options as part of the career, as part of their academic experience. This really exemplifies those ideas. And then one final example from Chicago. City College of Chicago, 7 institutions, 115,000 students, traditionally has not had a strong reputation. And in 2010, in other words, they had not good outcomes, bad outcomes, not recognized by the business community in Chicago because they weren't, the business community wasn't really hiring from them, low completion rates and the like. So in 2010, before he was leaving, Mayor Daley appointed a woman who had actually been through one of the city colleges, this one, Olive Harvey, on the south side, and then transferred to Illinois Institute of Technology, which is a prestige private institution, and got on to a career in business with a large utility company. It appointed her as chancellor. Then when Rahm Emanuel came on, he had community college as one of his major priorities. And what they did was take a look at every single program and do an analysis like this. This is for transportation, distribution, and logistics. And basically they worked with employers, and the mayor has been Emanuel has been very instrumental in helping bring employers as well as 4-year institutions to help them analyze the kinds of jobs that at each level of basic certificate, advanced certificate, associate degree, bachelor's that students would need, and essentially help them thoroughly revamp their curriculum. And they're also specializing their institutions. There's 7 of them, as you saw throughout the city, according to what area, the industry that is prominent in their community. So Olive Harvey is in the far south side. Within 5 miles of Olive Harvey is one of the great 10 miles is one of the great transportation hubs in the world, with 3 airports, truck and rail nodes, as well as the 4th largest port in the country, in the port of Chicago, which is actually in Indiana. And so they worked with companies to essentially redo their curriculum using, kind of schematics like this. One thing the company said that told them was that, well, while you can get decent warehouse and some logistics tech jobs with a certificate or an associate degree, the best jobs and what we really need are folks with bachelor's degrees. And by the way, we mainly hire from Southern Illinois University Carbondale. And so Olive Harvey College, which is in a very low income area, has basically built a strong articulation agreement with assistance from the companies to SIU Carbondale in their logistics Bachelor of Science program. So this, as a result of this redesign, with a special focus on the relevance of programs, making sure they lead to jobs and/or to further education clearly. The City Colleges has increased their completion rate from 7% to 14%. They've almost doubled the number of credentials, including associate degrees, that they've produced. But more importantly is that they not only increased the quantity, but because those degrees have been mapped out with assistance from employers and senior institutions, you know, there's strong indication that these are also quality degrees as well. And so the next phase for the community colleges, for the city colleges, is essentially to require students, which they started last fall, to choose one of these 10, they call them career, academic and career focus areas. And again, these are based on the needs of the Chicago area, the job needs. And students are required from the start to pick one of these and to begin an exploratory process, follow a map that's been created by faculty within each of these areas. Here, for example, is the overview of the business program, which has an overview of the program, sample career options. This is from the catalog on the website. You can drill down. Then it has specific program offerings at different levels for the different types of programs, recommended transfer options, and again, on the website you can drill down and learn out more of these, and you know, sample courses. So in one page, this is essentially a summary of the City College business programs, including sample courses, because like a lot of students come in don't really knowing that you need statistics for business. They think you just make money in business. So. And then when you drill down even further, you get a semester by semester, like I showed you earlier, map of the courses that you need to take. And on the right-hand side, you see these achievements and next actions. Those are the milestones that students are expected to achieve, in addition to, of course, passing these courses, and the kinds of both, you know, requirements, but also the positive things students are expected to do to be able to progress. And these things can be tracked in the same way that course success can be tracked. So while all of these examples, you know, have taken different approaches, there are a number of design principles that they all share, starting with helping students start with goal setting from the start. And in the City College of Chicago, for example, the 10 focus areas are on the application, and the student is required to choose one of those 10 focus areas. And they get a letter of, again, this is for students applying, they get a letter not just from the city colleges, but from the dean of the like business or whatever program area it is of the college to which they're going to go, saying, welcome to our program. And then they go into orientation, which are around these focus areas, their initial advising, and then the city colleges are now setting up first-year experience courses, required first-year experience courses in the 10 areas so that students can explore you know, careers and further education in their initial area of interest, as well as, of course, work on college success skills. So it's a progressive process. It's not a one-shot deal. Helping students over time move toward more really honing their decisions, and their decisions are helped by roadmaps created by faculty and advisors to say, if this is the direction you want to go, this is how we would recommend you proceed, and the sequence of courses, etc. And these are the critical milestones that you need to achieve, or things you should be doing in order to succeed. You can change that, you can customize it, but you need to see someone to do it. The whole intake process, actually the way I just described, is redesigned. Instead of a sorting system like we have now, and our research suggests that the intake process of community colleges basically sorts students out into a developmental and college-ready track. The whole intake process is redesigned with two goals: help students choose and successfully enter a program of study. And by successfully enter a program of study, I mean taking and passing those key gateway courses like, anatomy, physiology, bio 101, as well, and, that are critical if you're in healthcare, as well as in English and the right kind of math. And the way to do that is to integrate the teaching of basic skills into those gatekeeper courses across program areas, not just in math and English. Students' learning and learning outcomes are assessed, and teaching is improved across programs, not just courses of study. Right now, there's a lot of innovation that goes on in colleges, but it's often very fragmented and isn't really working across programs. It might be in particular departments, but those departments aren't working with other departments necessarily to improve teaching and learning across programs. And students' progress is monitored with frequent feedback and support provided as needed. The key here, though, in all of this, and the way to really engage people in all of this work, even though students proceed from left to right, from connection all the way through to completion and beyond, is to start with the end in mind. And the end is careers. The end is careers and the further education, whatever that is, whether it be associate degree for certificate, bachelor's degrees. And Rob has pointed out, if you're interested in areas like psychology, there are good degrees and good jobs in psychology, but you essentially need at least a master's degree to get a job in there. That has to be clearly part of the path for students, even though starting at the basic level. And then the idea of starting with the careers. Go ahead. Yeah.
Just to pop in, Davis. I mean, when I talk about this, and I go through some stuff, one of the things I talk about is, I don't know how many people know that psychology is the second most popular major nationally. And the estimates hover between 12 and 14% of people in undergraduate institutions nationally are majoring in psychology, working towards a psychology degree. And first of all, there's not 12% of the jobs in the field that require a psychology degree. And secondly, I have 3 degrees in psychology, and I would firmly state that we should never let anyone major in psychology unless they sign a waiver saying they understand that to get a job in psychology, you need a master's degree. An associate's or bachelor's does not do you anything in psychology. It qualifies you to work at Enterprise Rent-A-Car, which is not necessarily a bad job, but probably not why most people are studying psychology. So there's both a funnel problem, which is that we haven't really mapped the number of jobs to the number of people we allow to be psychology majors. But the other issue is that the jobs in psychology are at the master's and doctorate level.
So starting with the end in mind, and in the case of psychology, and by the way, I was just at Lorain County Community College, where the psych faculty has been working with the psych faculty at Cleveland State to help create a 5-year bachelor's master's program and to link students from the community college into that program, because there are jobs in counseling psychology in Ohio, but they need a master's degree. So starting with the end in mind, and then backward mapping the programs and the sequence of courses and the various milestones, and again focusing the intake on helping students choose and successfully enter a program of study. And actually these broad areas, like the focus areas at the City College of Chicago, we can begin to extend down into the K-12 schools as well as into adult ed programs, so that we're helping prepare students for broad program areas, not just preparing them for college. So we'll skip the homework we'll wait on the homework for a minute. So I seem to have dropped out of my, oh, there we go. So at this point, we are open for questions, comments, critiques. And Yesenia, I gather folks are going to post questions if they're interested.
I have asked our community college colleagues to please go ahead and post questions in the chat feature located in the GoToWebinar control panel. So please feel free to do that.
I know that everyone has actually started enacting guiding pathways as of
yeah.
That's
okay, so everyone started enacting guided pathways. It is awkward over the webinar, but what we propose, what we've talked to Larry and Yesenia and company about, is to a process whereby we assign, for those colleges that are interested, an exercise that we've used in other places that we found very useful, or the colleges have told us they find useful, and that is to essentially. Can you see this?
Davis,
yeah,
sorry, I wanted to let you know that it looks like folks are using the question box, which you may only be able to view. It looks like there's upwards of 20 questions posted. Are you able to?
Oh, there are? I don't see any
I
questions.
can't see them either.
Okay, if you look at your control panel.
Yeah, you got to expand the chat there, man.
Expand the chat?
It should be under the question area or a hyperlink to the questions. I believe it's not letting me view it because it's recording it, but because you have control of the screen, if you click on the questions, you should be able to view it. There is also a little blue box to the left of the dashboard. It is the fourth one, starts with the arrow, then it's the mic, then it's the webcam, then it's a blue box. If you click on that box, I believe it'll allow you to view the box with the questions.
Rob, do you see these? If you do, just go ahead, because I don't.
No, I don't actually. I see Yesenia is posting the questions, but I don't see any questions after that.
Well, Yesenia, you want to just list some of, or go?
Yeah, can you read them off, Yesenia, so we can talk back to them?
I'm going to just steal your screen for a minute, Davis, because it's not allowing me, so stand by, okay?
Okay.
Okay. Webinar being recorded. Yes, we can hear you. Okay, lots of we can hear you. Let's see. Okay, what would be a path for part-time students since most of the programs shown are full-time?
That's a really good question, and one we always get asked. There are two things here. In creating these maps of the sort that you saw, those are sort of the ideal default maps from which we start with students. And in fact, there's a move nationally to start with a map that has full-time as 15 credits because students can't complete a program within within 2 years if they just take 12 credits. That said, we understand that many students can't attend full-time. The reason it starts with 15 is that, again, this is the default. This is sort of where we're starting from. And the process is you take the default maps and you customize it to particular students and where they're coming from, whether they're spending credits and the like. So most of the colleges that have done this have also created part-time maps, but again, starting part-time at 8 or 9 credits, because we know well that if students are seeking a degree and they're only taking a course or 2 per term, their chances of completing are almost nil. Now, Rob has argued, and I agree that these maps are almost even more important for part-time students and for students who have to stop out, because it shows them where they are and how far they have to go. Right now, we show them the catalog, which essentially gives them an idealized map, which is generally 12 credits, even though they won't be able to finish in 2 years. And we're not giving them a clear sense of what it really takes. And again, this is not saying that all students are going to follow that map, that idealized 15-credit full-time map. They're not. But it's a starting place from which to begin the discussion with students. And if a student wants to attend part-time, we can show them with these maps the implications about how long is it actually going to take you, and how much is it going to cost you to to go part-time if you just choose to do 2 courses rather than 3, for example. So it helps with the discussions. Rob?
And the cost of part-timers wandering is much higher, right? I mean, as full-timers wander, there's a cost to it, but they're making, in many cases, they're making some forward momentum towards a degree. If you're taking 2 classes a semester, and there's, by the way, a whole other side discussion here about what financial stability resources we could try to give students so they could go more full-time instead of part-time. But if students can truly only take 2 courses a semester, then they really need to count. And they need to make forward progress for the students, and the student needs to know what to take next, even more so than a full-time student.
The other thing I would say is it's definitely true that many students cannot attend full-time, even if we do provide them with incentives. However, if we can show students the path of what they're taking, if we can provide them with more predictable schedules, and we didn't go into that, but having a map and knowing where students are along their maps, where all your students are, much better enables you to predict what courses will need to be offered, so that chairs and others can figure out what faculty they need to hire, and can help with space planning, so there aren't courses or sections that are canceled, which is really damaging to students and their efforts to try to move ahead. But when you look at programs like you look at the Council for Adult Experiential Learning, programs that are well suited for adults and that are successful in serving adults, they're generally very compressed and accelerated. They're offered in compressed format with multiple delivery formats, but with a schedule that is predictable, so that working adults can manage their child care and elder care and their work around their school, and they can figure out what they need term in advance. They're compressed and accelerated. They're not flexible, show up whenever you want to, because we know from the research that even though it is tough to do the accelerated programs, that working adults really, so I think we really have to step back and say, by allowing students to attend part-time, by enabling them to enroll whenever they can, are we really helping them toward a degree? And this is really questioning that.
Okay, thank you, Davis and Rob. Just so you know, that was our folks over at Bergen, so thank you for that question. We have 4 more questions posted. The next question is, what is the most common resistance from the faculty that they worked with, those institutions that were cited?
Yeah, I mean, so Davis can chime in too here, but I mean, the common faculty resistance takes a number of forms. I mean, first of all, the resistance, I wouldn't always categorize it. There are some really good questions that everyone, faculty, staff, and administrator, ask about these models, from the standpoint of who gets to decide what's on the pathways. Aren't we limiting choice? Isn't free choice? I mean, we do a whole, and when we come in June in person, we'll go through some of these questions in person. There's a lot of really good questions faculty can ask, and I think part of the story here at places that have pulled this off is they've engaged faculty in those questions very purposefully, and they've let them be part of the solution. When Sinclair in Ohio did this, and they redesigned, I think it was 180 of the 180 programs with both a full-time and part-time map, they didn't do it administratively. They had the faculty in each of those areas determined. So if the accounting faculty would say, what is the best 2-year degree path for an accounting student and the best 4-year degree path for a part-time accounting student, down to default electives. And so in that particular case, it was still a faculty-driven process, because the faculty in accounting were saying, I think these 3 humanity courses that these students used to be able to pick from a list of 600, these are the 3 that matter most, and Davis will talk about this too, I'm sure, maybe give students the combination of learning outcomes that they're going to need to be accountants. And so there is a part of this where we can kind of turn this a little and say that we get to let faculty be in control of the solution. Other places have been more top-down with it, we'll be honest. I think it really has to fit your culture at your college. We also have to call out, really, clearly that at the end of the day, one of the models that we are bucking against is that faculty can choose to teach what they teach when they want to teach it. And I'm very sensitive to this issue and realize that we hired faculty under models where they could teach what they wanted to teach when they wanted to teach it. What we're trying to go to here is put together these structured programs for students that work better for them. And it may result in not teaching all 15 courses in psychology that are in the subdomain of psych. I mean, the story I tell here, by the way, is that when I used to teach psychology part-time at Foothill, stop me if this sounds familiar, but the dean came to me at one point and said, hey, our psychology enrollment's down. Are there any courses you could offer that you think would be highly enrolled? And I said, well, sure, I could teach psychology in the law because that's what my doctorate is in. We don't have it on the books. And so we rushed it through curriculum. We offered it the next semester, and it filled immediately, and it was a highly popular course. I look back on that now and realize there's about 10 things wrong with that process. But the biggest one is that course wasn't on anyone's pathway. And it wasn't giving them forward progress. It was just degree credit. And so we were actually doing those students a disservice. But that's, when we think about enrollment management, that's how we've commonly done things. So I think the nature of faculty resistance or exploration of these issues or engagement hovers around the combination of what's best for the student. It does come around issues of kind of academic freedom, which I would always define as that once we outline the courses students take and the learning outcomes of the course, which the faculty involved in, academic freedom is the faculty's purview to figure out how to best teach to those learning outcomes in the way that they, with their expertise and hopefully in-class research, see fit. So that's kind of the fire hose answer. There's a lot behind that question. But I think that the net result is purposeful engagement.
The biggest fear and issue around faculty is, what if my course isn't on the path, isn't on the map? And that is a concern. Where this has really worked well, as Rob suggested, the faculty are empowered to take the lead in this, and the college leadership assures the faculty, for example, at Miami-Dade, the faculty union there was really against pathways, and then Eduardo Padron, the president, said, no one's going to lose their jobs over this thing. So there really has to be an assurance that this isn't going to be a process of weeding out people. And when he made that assurance, the union was all over this because they realized they were all for it, because they realized students, are meandering and not finding their way through. So, really, and we've also found that when, how often do we step back and take a look at our programs? And for the transfer programs in particular, again, we don't consider an AA a program. We don't consider Gen Ed a program. We consider a program something that has Gen Ed and an AA, but that leads, or an AS, but that leads to junior standing in a major. That's a very different perspective, and generally faculty, that requires faculty across disciplines, Gen Ed and technical disciplines, to get together and talk about programs and learning and teaching in a way that we rarely see at community colleges. And our experience is they find that very, very rich experience when they're empowered to take the lead on it, and when they're assured that people aren't going to lose their jobs. I'll say one more thing, which is surprisingly, we found the most resistance among advisors. And I think this is because this, in some ways, the faculty role, they're part of creating programs, so this isn't too far out of their role. This really changes the advisor's role. It changes the advisor's role from a heavy focus on scheduling courses to really advising students, working much more closely with faculty and the departments. And so it's not that there's and then there are ideas like we should start with 15 credits, and can students handle this, that are deeply embedded in community college advising for good reason, but they're challenged by this. And it's not that the issue isn't that challenging. It's just that this requires a very different mindset than we have required in the past. I'll say one last thing, which is in terms of the cost issues, and CCRC and Rob, we have been doing a lot of research to try to understand the costs of this thing. of this kind of approach. This approach requires you really to reorganize advising and to take better use of electronic advising. Where the real costs are, and we're trying to begin to quantify those, most of the colleges and universities that have done this have reorganized advising, but they've also hired more advisors, and they have made much more use of faculty advising, and with a clear handoff between students, coming in, and once they decide, an exploratory major, then once they decide on a specific major. So advising and the technology around it, the e-advising systems, as well as the coordination in the professional development, tend to be the big cost areas here. And so we can talk a bit more about this, but really this is responding to a lot of economic and political pressures, the financial aid issues, the reduction of financial aid from 17 to 12 credits, the fact that students really need to get through quickly, the fact that more and more students are paying more of their own money for tuition. All of these factors, as well as performance funding and the like, are really pushing colleges to move to a business model where you're attracting students not because you're offering cheap or low-cost courses, but you're offering relatively low-cost access to programs of study that lead to further education and careers.
Thank you to Ocean, our colleagues at Ocean, for that question. Our next question comes from Raritan Valley, and the question is, what data would you collect to start this process?
We have some data in terms of the homework assignment. The homework assignment is basically to, right now, just list out by whatever program area or program designation you use, what program students are in. And so the data that I would collect in general is programmatic data. Do we know what program students are in? Do we and the student know how far along students are toward completing program requirements? Do we even really have a clear idea what the program requirements are? So those are in this homework assignment, which we'll give you in a minute, which we're going to suggest that you, if those colleges that are interested do, and then we're going to have homework, home office hours on April 1st. It's no joke, and to talk this through. But basically, you want to move the focus of data collection from enrollment in courses to, which of course is important, but to enrollment in programs and how far along students are in programs of study. And you can do that starting now, and do that in a way that really, even if you don't want to go down this road, or don't want to go down this road now, it's fine, but can really provide an edifying discussion for folks on what programs are students in, and who actually is not being currently tracked in a program. There are a lot of students sort of in a no man's land that we're not really tracking. Rob, any suggestions there?
No, I think that's right. I mean, I think there's pathways questions we could ask that deal with unit accumulation and, some of the key performance indicators around how many units have a student completed or what percentage of their program of study have they completed are really hard to measure right now, because we can measure units, but we actually don't always know without degree audit if they're units towards a particular program. And so that's part of where we see the field going with the data. For now, our best proxy is unit accumulation, but I think that I'll just follow where you went on that, David. I think that makes perfect sense.
Okay, gentlemen, we have 2 questions remaining. Actually 3. The next one is coming to us from Cumberland, I believe. What is the system driving the program mapping from the community colleges to the university partner? Also, are you using a third-party vendor to obtain the career opportunities / salaries?
If you're asking about a particular software system, there isn't one. It varies. If you're talking about the Arizona State University one that I mentioned, that was a system that they developed and that tracks the community college students into the university. They developed with a grant from the Kresge Foundation, and that links into their advising system, which is called eAdvisor. It's very sophisticated. However, I want to make this very clear. Even in the case of Arizona State, which has one of the most sophisticated e-advising and tracking systems that, again, not only tracks their own undergraduates, but goes down into the community colleges and tracks students on these maps in the community college. The Art Blakemore, who was the architect of the e-advisor, said the two hardest parts of e-advisor were, number one, getting the deans to get the faculty together to create the maps. And number two, to update the maps and to communicate changes not only through the university, but down into the community colleges. So the bottom line is, while technology is really potentially powerful here, what's really important and the hard thing is the human process of getting faculty and advisors together to map out the maps, and then to create a process of communication which can be enabled by technology, by which these changes are communicated down into the throughout the programs and down into your partner institutions. In the case of City College of Chicago, I mean, ASU is obviously the big dog in Phoenix, and it's working with this huge Maricopa Community College system. In the case of Chicago, they've worked upwards into the universities and with employers. And again, they're using PeopleSoft, but they're upgrading their PeopleSoft based on maps that were created, just without software systems. The maps are, and the process of creating the maps are what's critical here. And before you start working on your software systems and thinking about that, although there are issues there, you got to start thinking about the human process and how you're going to design these programs.
Okay, our next question comes from Brookdale Community College. I'm wondering if there are any failures in using this guided pathway approach. For instance, I'm concerned about a student that requires a tremendous amount of remediation, as evidenced by the entrance exam, and instead of taking a traditional remedial course, now has their remediation being taught in a gateway course.
So a number of things on this. It's a very good question. So what we're finding is we're not suggesting that every student be mainstreamed into a gateway course. The research is showing, and the experience of institutions like Long Beach City Community College, like the Virginia system, and other places where they have essentially changed the cut score, is that many more students than in the past went into, and especially with added support, have been able to succeed in the college level gatekeeper courses. At the same time, there is a substantial number of students, and this can range from a quarter to a third to 40%, who are not helped, who are not succeeding in moving up. And the fact is that remediation is not helping them either. So in other words, those other students who were in the past had been sent to remediation and then were able to move up into the gatekeeper courses, were masking the fact that there is that kind of student who that question describes who is not being helped and certainly would not be successful in the remedial course. We don't have a clear idea, I'll be honest, what to do with these students. We have this discussion everywhere we go. We just discussed it last week in Florida, Rob and I, and a substantial number of these students do have learning disabilities. And then, of course, they're ESL students and native students who are just very low, readiness. I would say the CUNY START program, which is promising, and we're involved, CCRC, my colleagues at CCRC are involved in evaluating that, as well as iBest and other efforts to contextualize instruction, show some promise, but I'll be honest, we don't know how to deal with those students.
Yeah, and David, I would just say,
the fact is that the current approach isn't working for them,
right,
either. That's
the key, I think, is that we've never done well by these students. I mean, so I don't know that this, I would argue that the structure still has the likelihood of helping these students. Certainly co-remediation and the structure have the likelihood of helping these students more than what we did before. I don't think it's going to solve the problem for the lowest of the low students. And I think that we have, as a system, have to really struggle with that. I mean, I am a big access guy as well, but I don't think access with a 5% chance of getting anywhere with it is really access. I mean, and a lot of students at that level are also taking a lot of loans and racking up student loan debt. So, I mean, we need to think about what happens with. I just in my head I rank students from 0 to 100 on some mythical preparedness scale, and what I've talked about recently is the students who are in the top 20. We get 19 of those 20 students to graduate now. We would get 19 to 20 to graduate no matter what we do. I mean, there's 20% of students who are going to do well no matter what the model. And there's probably at the bottom, maybe it's 10, maybe it's 15, maybe it's 20. I don't think it's more than 20. But it's some number of students that aren't going to graduate. Like one out of that 10 or 15 or 20 is going to graduate no matter what we do unless we significantly do something differently. I don't think what we're talking about here really affects either of those students. What it affects is the 60 in the middle. And right now at most colleges, we maybe get 10 or 15 of those students to complete out of 60, and that's where the real leverage is. There's a lot of research suggesting that the combination of factors about providing financial stability as well as some of these structured pathways will get us that, and we've seen it at these other colleges. These are the students we can help complete more quickly and with more focused into towards, junior standing in their major or towards their careers more directly. That's where the leverage is in the organization. It's a very real question what to do with the bottom 10, 15, or 20, but I would go back to where Davis finished. Right now, we're not doing anything for them either.
But let me also make clear that even with that whatever percent in the middle, we're not necessarily advocating that in all cases students be mainstreamed and have co-requisite support. We are advocating that whatever academic support is provided is extremely closely connected to what is needed in the college level course, and ideally not just in math and English. So two examples are the Chabot, Katie Hearn and company at Chabot College in California, where they have integrated all their remediation in English Comp and reading and writing into one level of remediation. And the whole goal of that is to really practice and use college level content, albeit maybe at a slower pace. And they've had a very positive success in that. So that is still a prerequisite system. They've mainstreamed more students into the college comp, but the other students who aren't mainstreamed, they've had very good success. But the key is, even though it's prerequisite, it's highly connected. The second one is one Rob knows better than I, which is the Mathway Statway model, where it's a year-long, Statway is a year-long statistics course that combines what might be called remedial instruction with college-level instruction. It enables the student in a year to complete the college-level course and incorporates strong pedagogy like productive persistence. Look, the point is, the faculty need to decide how best to do this, and we can look to models on how to do this. The point is, it definitely has to be connected, and to the extent possible, we're finding more success than people thought was possible in actual co-requisite integrating the support into the college level programs. Terry Manning from Central Piedmont has recently done a study on the cost of their math remediation, which they modularized their math, and it enabled many students to get into college level math and the college level courses much more quickly in the past. They saw large declines in remedial enrollment, upwards of 40%, but they also saw increases in the college level enrollment and success. And she said that, at least in the first term, that the chairs and the deans didn't think it was going to work, so they didn't offer enough college level sections. So the point is, when it's not like we have a clear answer on this, it's hard to identify those lower level students. We just know that there are a lot of students now that could, with either well-connected prerequisite support and with support once they're in the college level course can do better than they are doing now under the current system, which essentially overall tends to sort students out to divert them rather than to prepare them for success in college.
Final question.
Looks like we've got about 4 more minutes.
Yeah, there was a final question about whether or not they could get a copy of the presentation, and the answer to the folks at Bergen is yes, and to those that are still with us. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Nespoli for a moment.
Yeah, before we wrap up, I'd like Jacinia, if you would, with Rob and Davis, to sketch what comes next, the office hours and the homework, as we've called it, that colleges who have heard enough to be interested might try to cobble together. Linda Lamb is here from our office, and I think she can add value by engaging our officers to have a group think about putting together the homework. And we are pointing towards June, a June event, to have Rob and Davis with us here in New Jersey for those who Coalition of the Willing, as we like to call it in New Jersey. But so Justinia, I think
Justinia, can you turn it over to, because I have the homework on my slide, can you turn it back to me?
Let me say, can you do that, Justinia, while I'm talking? Well, let me quickly say then, Rob and Davis, you've cited Queensborough and some others. I want to make the point here, and you can elaborate a bit. We're trying to take a multi-college approach here in New Jersey. Strength and collaboration is part of our way of doing business. You're working with Michigan and maybe 1 or 2 other states, and I want to make the point, you can elaborate. That's what we're trying to put in play here. Of our 19 colleges, we may have 4, 5, 6 as a cohort that really want to roll up their sleeves and get to work on this in the summer and the fall. But let me stop there so Jacinia can flip back to the homework slide. But Rob, Davis, comment about what we have in mind here, much like what you're doing with Michigan.
Yeah, I mean, and we've done Davis and I have kind of tag teamed a lot of this effort in states like Michigan and Arkansas, where we just started also the work on completion by design, and on a CCA project in Tennessee and Georgia and Indiana. Everyone takes on a slightly different flavor, right? There's some version of working towards these common goals. In Michigan, we're working more with a wider range of colleges, and we don't have a lot of on-the-ground technical support built in. In Arkansas, we're working with a smaller number of colleges, and we have both kind of the initiative level and technical support built in. And so we've worked under both models, and I think what we've found over time, and Davis has created these amazing tools we can use to help colleges guide these pathways. Even in the places where we're able to do technical assistance, it always comes down to our role as one of catalysts and being able to share thought capital and maybe some tools. And even if we have a day with a college, we go home at the end of that day. What happens is what the college does with it. So I think through these statewide events like the one in June and anything that comes forward, we can bring thought capital and discussion to the table about what other colleges have wrestled with. And how it goes forward from there is really up to, the specifics of how the state system and the colleges want to move forward. Davis?
I mean, this is a heavy lift. We're talking about a major change. On the other hand, ultimately, it's got to be done by colleges locally. And so I would not commit to this if I were a president or leadership in a college unless I'm serious about this. On the other hand, this fits very well with other initiatives that you, Larry, and Jacinia and others have described in New Jersey. In particular, the efforts to improve transfer outcomes, and also, the effort to try to get more students coming through the door into a program of study. So I don't know. I think, all we can talk about is those principles, provide some examples. Ultimately, it's up to you guys. And I think, I think the ingredients, it sounds to me, the ingredients are placed in Jersey. It's not, the steps aren't really rocket science, but it just takes a lot of leadership and commitment. And so I would say find some schools, if there are, a handful, to work on this, but focus, heavily on what you're already doing, especially around transfer and pathways to careers generally.
Davis, I didn't know
so
if you want show anything, but I did give you control. It says that it's waiting to view your screen. I would like folks to
Okay, so
that we will be.
so can you see the homework, and we'll send this out? Can you see that?
No, I think.
No, we can't. I think we can just describe it and send it out. We're at 12:30.
Okay. So basically, the homework is, and we'll send this out. Just produce a report of the number of your students currently enrolled by program in which they are currently enrolled, and use all your designations, including undecided, undeclared, gen ed, liberal arts, dev ed, dual enrollment, as well as, of course, any specific academic program areas. Be as specific as you can. And then there are a number of questions that we would recommend and that other colleges have found useful, whether or not you want to move ahead with this, which get to how accurately does this list really reflect the program students are in, how far they are along, reflect their intent. Are the paths through our programs to transfer and employment outcomes clearly defined? The students have easy access to information on how far along they are. And then who's responsible for monitoring the progress of every student in every program area on that list? Are there students like in pre-health or in gen ed or in dev ed who no one, at least at a programmatic level, is tracking? Because we find that those three groups of students, dev ed, gen ed, and pre-health, in most community colleges are the largest group of students, and in general, we find that no one's really tracking their progress. So if that's the case, it seems to be an issue. And so we would suggest you do this homework. It's easy for your IR office to do. They generally do it. It's just a snapshot. And then on April 1, we're going to be having a webinar or office hours online, Rob and I, to just answer some questions, lead some discussion. And then on June 3rd, we're coming and doing a day-long workshop. And there's another tool that we've sent to Yesenia that sort of lays out the ideal parts of a guided pathways system. And there's essentially 4 parts: helping clarify the path for students, number 1; helping students get into a program of study, number 2; helping ensure that students, once in a program, are continuing on and making progress, number 3; and number 4, ensuring that students are learning across the program. And so there are a number of, it's set up so that you can discuss what your college currently does in that area, is there a need, and what you might do to improve practice in those areas. We would recommend that folks who want to come to the June 3rd workshop fill out at least, the initial part. What are we doing now? And then June 3rd could provide an opportunity to talk about, what could we do differently, or what more could we do, and how could we build on what we're currently doing. This is a key thing. The idea is not a current initiative, a new initiative, but an effort that really integrates a lot of what you're doing. And we think through that experience, Larry, that colleges would have a clear sense of what this would entail and be able to decide whether or not they would want to take it on at all or now. Again, this is a heavy lift. We wouldn't recommend it. Everyone's in a position. You may have your accreditation coming up. There may be other issues. But we think this process will be edifying enough just to do it. We've certainly found that from other institutions. It will also give you a clear sense if you do want to proceed, what it would take.
We will be sure to send out the Guided Pathways flyer that outlines both the office hours as well as the day that you are coming up. Very quickly, I'd just like to take a moment to thank you both again for a wonderful presentation. You can amplify that by 19 community colleges that joined us today on the webinar. Again, we thank you for your time and we wish everyone a wonderful day.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Have a good
Have
one.
a great day.